Hi, I'm Don Cantor, former co-director of JLIC at Johns Hopkins University and current director at the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience in Richmond, Virginia.
And I'm Alex Ozar, co-director of JLIC at Yale University, and this is the Torah JLIC podcast. JLIC supports thousands of young Jews in their college years and beyond, providing them with the nourishment they need to sustain an upward trajectory of Jewish commitment and growth as they enter the broader world. And the animating engine of that effort, that has always been and will always be Talmud Torah, high-level, richly meaningful, thoughtfully creative Torah learning, ambitiously attuned to the realities of where our students are. On the Torah JLIC podcast, we hope to share some of that Torah with you. Thanks for listening.
Today, we get to hear from Rabbi Alex again. So instead of reading his bio again, I'm just going to tell a story that happened just a few days ago. My wife's brother is a Maccabee.
I'm only marginally nervous about where this is going, but okay.
My wife's brother is a Maccabee, and we went to a Maccabees concert not too far from where we are in Virginia Beach. And afterwards, we're going up and we're talking to my nice brother-in-law, Ari, and Julian or Chaim Horowitz, who is another one of the Maccabees. I think he's the music director. He comes up and he says, "I really love your podcast." And I say, "Wow, that's awesome." There's like some random person, and he's not so random. He's a Maccabee, is listening to our podcast. That's so great. And he goes, "Yeah, I'm a huge Rav Alex fan." And I said, "Oh, okay. So it's not like you just picked up the podcast and we're blowing up. It's just that he, like everyone else who ever meets Alex Ozar, is a huge Rav Alex fan." And so once again, instead of having my ego inflated by someone just picking up our podcast, having it blow up, it's really just all about Rav Alex Ozar.
Well, let's not dwell on that too long, but that's very kind. And but yeah, I think we should dive in.
Let's go.
So look, I was thinking we should talk about anti-Semitism on college campuses because just nobody's talking about this. It's like, you feel like it's such a big issue and like it should get some attention, and wherever you look, it's nowhere. And so I think we need to be the ones to bring some of this to light.
Yeah, I can't believe it's like nowhere on social media. No Jewish news outlets
It's
are
like
talking
really
about
like
it.
you'd think this would be an issue. But anyway, dropping the sarcasm again. But I do want to try to add a strand to our thinking on this question, specifically from the perspective of somebody working on campus in a pastoral, religious, rabbinic role, helping to cultivate the spiritual personalities of our students and helping them to grow and think about their place in the world and their mission in the world and what the horizons of meaning and purpose can look like for them. And I actually think there's a lot to say here. I do want to say first, before we get into what I think are the deeper questions, which I don't think I'm going to say anything awful, but it's may not be what everybody wants to hear. But I do want to stress first, as religious professionals, as Jewish professionals, and as just concerned Jewish people, there are a couple of like bottom line responsibilities which need to be just clear at the outset and are the first things that we need to be taking care of in this context. First of all, as campus professionals, as rabbis, educators, and people here to support our Jewish students, the first and most important thing we need to do in this context is to make sure that every single Jewish student has at least one place on campus where they genuinely can just feel comfortable and be proud and just naturally be themselves as the proud, extraordinary young Jews that they are. And specifically as people who have any kind of positive relationship with the state of Israel. You see the protests and the encampments on the news, things like that. To me, the much more difficult and much more insidious forms of anti-Semitism on campus are the quieter things and just on a social level. Small, quiet interactions between students and their friends, and the kinds of messages they receive about their identity. Right now on campus, to be a proud Zionist, but really just to have any relationship with Israel that is short of actively, loudly, publicly condemning Israel as a genocidal actor, marks you for social opprobrium. you sacrifice significant social capital if you are a Jew and you are not willing to publicly condemn Israel. And the mere fact that you're a Jew heightens that need. Everyone is pressured to join in that movement, and if you're a Jew, all the more so. You're considered sinful if you don't join that movement. And if you want to have any positive standing in the community, you need to do that. And so, like, the most basic thing you need to do is provide a place of refuge. Students know that there's a place on campus and a group of people on campus and a community where their fullness of their Jewish identity, which for many of our students, and I think rightly includes their commitment to the state of Israel, where that's something that's celebrated and feels good and reinforced. And we need to be helping them remember and helping them develop the resilience to be strong and proud Jews and people committed to Israel, even out in the public sphere. So that's line one. And the second responsibility I just want to hit at the outset, this is sometimes as largely falls on major Jewish organizations and people with really significant power and people with connections in Washington and just in general the halls of power in the United States and elsewhere, and people in position to be influencing university administrations, which sometimes is campus professionals. There are things that universities can do, like university officials and administrations. I think in general, they're like anything else. They're just really big, bloated bureaucracies, and they're really slow to do anything meaningful about anything, and certainly to change in any meaningful way. But there are things that university bureaucracies can do, and that university leadership could and should be doing to address the very real problems of anti-Semitism on campus. And I've seen progress made in this area, and I think there's a lot of more progress in a lot of places that could be made. And those of us who have or in the position or can put ourselves in the position to be advocating for things like better time, place, and manner restrictions on demonstrations, ensuring clear and transparent accountability, and when students report anti-Semitism, making sure that it's being heard and responded to appropriately. A lot of things. Ideally, even maybe developing curricular balance among the faculty. If we want to get ambitious, and I think we should be ambitious. So there's a lot there. So again, both on the creating a place of refuge and just direct support for the pain that our students often feel, and for trying to make a difference on a bureaucratic institutional level was really important. But what I want to talk about today is...
I just want to say this was this is the Alex Ozar version of no offense, but...
Yeah, sure. But no, really no offense. Like, that's all really good. It's really important and vital.
Yeah, I think it's important. And sometimes when we try to talk about what we zero in on just like one little aspect of an issue that we could perhaps deal with a little bit better. And when we are maybe looking introspectively and how we could improve, it's not to say that we're the only ones at fault.
Yes. Good. And that's exactly very much in line with what I want to talk about. I actually think we are in an incredible and a unique position as Jews in 2025 on college campuses and in the United States, in the West in general. Both of my grandfathers, Don, I don't know your family story as well. Both of my grandfathers faced not just anti-Semitism on university campuses and in their careers, but faced like career impeding anti-Semitism. My paternal grandfather, a lot of trouble in medical school and a lot of trouble in the university system, and wound up having to work in Jewish circles in Kansas City. And my maternal grandfather, who was a highly accomplished scientist in Europe and had actually been in medical school in Germany. Strange story after the war. He was from Hungary originally. But he comes to the United States and he couldn't get into medical school here because of Jewish quotas. He tried to get into WashU in St. Louis and couldn't get in. He wound up doing a PhD instead and teaching at WashU Medical School. There have been times in Jewish history, and God forbid, we could certainly wind up again in a time where anti-Semitism is not just painful and not just vicious and bad, but has real material implications. It can threaten our physical safety, and it's certainly there has been very real violence in the United States. I think for the most part, most of us still feel generally safe, and even as we have to have massive amounts of security, and there are real costs there. But I walk around campus, all of our students walk around campus with yarmulkes, publicly identifying as Jewish, proudly Jewish in every context, and no one thinks twice about that as rendering them vulnerable to physical attack. That's just not what's going on here. And there also haven't yet been real material implications. Once in a while, there's a story where a student gets excluded from a like secret society or something, or some elite club, ostensibly because of their Zionist commitments, and that's a really big problem, and we've had to deal with that. But it's still, and I think could get significantly worse.
This is definitely Alex speaking from his Yale world.
Yeah, this is very much the secret society thing is over the top, but it's very real. Like, I think we might be on a road to a world where having Zionist commitments comes with real career material impeding costs, closes doors and avenues to success. But that's just not where we are right now. And right now, you can still be a proud Zionist and still do great in American society. And even on a university campus, our Jewish Zionist students are leaders in every field, in every club, in every sector, the university. And so I actually think this scenario, like this specific predicament, where I think we are confronting very real, very pointed, deeply vicious anti-Semitism, and yet it's not yet a material problem. It's a spiritual problem. So I think this is a unique opportunity for us to focus on anti-Semitism as a spiritual problem, and for us to actually think to go beyond just responding defensively and just protecting our interests, which, as I said at the beginning, we need to do. But I think we're in a position to do more than that, and we can think like constructively, proactively. What would it look like for us to try to make the world less anti-Semitic? And to try to address the root causes, and to try to get at like what are the specific spiritual vices and patterns of thought that underlie this kind of thinking, and how can we conduct ourselves such as to make things a little bit better gradually over time. And specifically today, now I find with all of that throat clearing, I want to talk about an idea that's gotten a lot of press the last few years. It goes under different names. People refer to it as settler colonial ideology, sometimes like the oppressor oppressed in caricature form, but this is very real. Many people think about the world on a macro political level based on the proposition that there are good people and there are bad people, and you are on one side of the other, and you need to make completely clear that you are on one side, that you are on the good side and you are not on the bad side. And the analysis of the world is fully dichotomous and Manichaean. So every bad thing that happens in the world is the result of some kind of systematic, and ultimately demonic force of evil. The paradigm here is the white settler colonialist who has taken over the world and literally did conquer the world. But then even and the structures of power that created are still with us and control everything, and control our thoughts and our language, and seep into and poison all human relations. And even where that's no longer overt, even where the official shackles of colonial rule have been thrown off, these structures of power still permeate. And so we find ourselves, those of us on the side of good, find ourselves not just trying to make the world a little bit better, but rather we're fighting an apocalyptic war. The armies of evil of the white settler colonialists have a kind of totalitarian power over us, and we need to, first of all, find it, discern its tentacles everywhere. Every form of evil is tied back to it, and we need to see that even where it's hidden. And so there's a kind of conspiratorial paranoia. Everything is interpreted as a function of this form of evil. And then the response and what we're going to try to do to make things better is going to be in equal and in kind. So just as this power has no respect for any kind of rules or morality, is subject to no limits. So our response should also be subject to no limits, and there should be no rules. And it's a zero-sum, all-out war, and anything goes, and all resistance is justified, and whatever it takes is justified. So there's a kind of, this already like reflects just a kind of classic structure of anti-Semitism, where you latch on to one group of people. In this case, it's an irony, but there's a reason for it. In this case, a group of people that is actually totally powerless, but you identify that powerless group of people as the all-powerful, omnipotent source of all of the evil in the world. Everything that's going on in my life, going wrong in my life, and everything that's going wrong in my society is actually a result of the conspiratorial viciousness of this one group. And then whatever I need to do to solve that problem, I need to do. And I don't have to follow the normal rules of engagement.
And that comes from the fact that we just have very clearly and cleanly demarcated between good and evil.
Yeah, so that's where I want to go, because I think my view is that we're seeing this become much more prominent part of public consciousness. This kind of language, this way of talking, has just become very common, especially in elite progressive spaces like universities. And again, this is part of the traditional structure of anti-Semitic ideology, and also, I actually think this is a fundamental human vice. We all do this. Everybody always wants to divide the world into the good people and the bad people. The reason we want to do this is it makes us feel better because we're the good guys and those are the bad guys. We all derive a kind of pleasure and satisfaction and security from the indignation of looking down at the bad people and hating the bad people. It provides us some kind of deep sustenance, and we all want that. We all need it on a very real level, and it lets us off the hook in a certain way. Because again, either you think that the problem is so bad and so pervasive and the evil is so powerful and so dominating that there's nothing to be done about it, and so we should just throw up our hands. Or you think that the evil is so bad and so pervasive and so fully fails to respect any kind of lines or rules that we can respond in kind, and we also shouldn't be bound by any kind of rules or constraints. And so we're free to respond however we want.
That's another very clean and easy either or proposition.
That the world is divided into people who think like that and people who don't.
No, I'm saying the people who give who make that dichotomy,
Very much.
That choice.
Yes, exactly right. And so I want to, in the context of anti-Semitism today, I just think can easily fall, we often do, fall into thinking of anti-Semites or the people, let's just say the people, and often the very young people, who are participating in these movements we see as anti-Semitic, we rightly see as anti-Semitic, and we see them as the bad people, and we think of ourselves as the good people. And I want to say, and this is the part I think some people might get mad at me for, I actually think that's deeply unhelpful. And the better way to put it is that I actually think it misses a really important opportunity that we have. But to get there, I want to turn to a passage in the Rambam, which I've shared with our students in the past, and focusing some of my Yavin Noraim teaching on next year. The Rambam famously says, based on the Gemara, Perek Gimel of Hilchos Tshuva, puts forward what I'm going to interpret. This maybe is a little maybe tendentious. Don, you'll tell me if it's too tendentious. But I think the Rambam puts forward the proposition in fairly clear terms that, practically speaking, as a matter of reality, just day-to-day actual reality, there are no evil people in the world. I think it's a radical proposition. He doesn't say that there couldn't be, or there never has been, or there never will be evil people in the world. But I think the Rambam paskins, as a matter of black and white, letter of the law, mefurish halacha, that there are no evil people. And I think this has really radical and deeply important implications for how we go about living our lives and doing our work in the world. So in Perek Gimel, in Hilchos Tshuva, he says, Kol echad b'echad minei ha'adam yesh lo zechuyot v'avonot. So every person, every single individual has both merits and sins. Everyone's a bundle of good and bad. If you have more good than bad, obviously everyone's going to have some sins, but if you have more good, a preponderance of good, then you're a righteous person. If your sins outweigh the merits, then you're a wicked person. If it's exactly 50-50, then you're just you're a mediocre person. You're an in-between person. And also a country. If the merits of all of the inhabitants outnumber the sins, then that state or that nation is righteous. If the reverse, then they are vicious and wicked. And same is true of the entire world. If the entire world, if you count, it's unclear if you count every individual sins in the aggregate, or if you count the number of people, how many people based on their own internal count of sins are righteous or wicked. But either way, if in the entire world you have a majority of either more sins overall in the aggregate, or you have a majority of sinners, then the world is wicked. And what happens? What are the results, the Rambam says? What are the consequences of these judgments? If you have a person whose sins outweigh their merits, miyad hu meis berisho, immediately, on the spot, he dies in his wickedness. And if you have a nation whose sins outnumber their merits, miyad hiovedet, as happens in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. As soon as they're judged that their sins outweigh their merits, they've done more evil than they've done good, then they die. They're obliterated. And same is true of the entire world, as happens in the story of Chen Kol Am Kulo, as happens in the story of the Mabul. The Mefarshim read this, the Ravid reads this, the Mishnah reads this, and say, wait, I don't understand. Like, we know lots of people. There are, just look at the Ravid. Lo k'mo shu sover. The Rambam is wrong. Shekashamru v'shayim nechamin la'altar l'misa shemiyan mesim. He says that wicked people die immediately. And he really meet right away. Ve'eno kain, the Ravid says, it's not true. Ki yesh rishayim chayim harbe. There are some really wicked people who live for a long time. This is like, it can't be right. Rambam's just wrong about this. This is empirically false. And so you get different responses in the classical commentaries. Like maybe he really means olam haba, but it doesn't seem like he means olam haba. I think, and we'll read what the Rambam says himself. I think the Rambam is very clear. He really means what he says. He says what he means clearly. He says that for any X, such that X is a wicked person, that X will die immediately. And so if it is the case that we don't see people just dropping dead, any person who's still alive is not a wicked person. They are a Benoni. They're just normal. They're mediocre people with a bundle of sins and merits. Everyone has done some bad, and they've done some good, and they will do some bad, and they will do some good. And for all we know, as he's going to say, and in fact, it appears to be the case, that they're evenly balanced. So he goes on. Now, this calculus, how we measure this, the relative balancing of sins and merits, so first of all, it's not, you can't just count the sheer number of like discrete sins or discrete actions that are sinful or virtuous. Rather, it's a matter of their qualitative measure. So some sins will count for more, some will count for less. Some good actions will count for more, some will count for less. Yes, Lucci, you can comment on there's some good things you can do which will outweigh many, many, many sins. And there are sins which will outweigh or have the weight corresponding to many, many good things that you do. And therefore, Ein shoklin ela b'dato shel hel deot. Therefore, we can't do this calculus. You cannot look at somebody and say, well, you can't even say, like, I've looked at this person's actions, I've done an assessment and appraisal, and I see that 60% of the things that they do are bad, and therefore they're a rasha. No, only God can make that judgment. Because only God knows how to properly weight the sins and the good deeds. And so, as I said, like, the Rambam is actually very clear that there could be a wicked person, and there have been in the past. There might be again in the future. But he says, first of all, we have no right to make that judgment, either about others or, importantly, about ourselves. We can't assume that because I've done a lot of bad things, I can't assume that I'm a rasha. Why? Because that lets me off the hook. If I'm a rasha, then I'm already in one of the bad guys, and there's no point in trying to be better. And if I'm a tzaddik, if I judge myself, well, I do mostly good things, and tzaddik, then there's nothing for me to work on because I'm all's good. It's the only morally interesting territory, only spiritually interesting territory is if I'm a Benoni. I'm somewhere in the middle, and like, or at least as an epistemic matter, for all I know, I'm right on the line. And so, right, I need to think, and I should always, the Rambam says, I should always think of myself as being balanced on that line. And the next thing I do can be the action that makes the difference in determining whether I'm a rasha or tzaddik. And so I want to say, our response to this kind of black and white zero-sum moral thinking, where in the actual case, the thinking is that white people are the source of all evil, and it happens to be the way history has developed that Jews have become sort of the spear of white colonial history, and for complicated intersectional reasons that are very hard to spell out, the source of all evil in the world is now consolidated in the state of Israel oppression of the state of Israel's oppression of the Palestinians. And if we can just unravel that, if we can just solve that problem through whatever means, then we will have solved the problem of evil in the world and be able to undo the pervasive evil of colonial oppression. And therefore, we can say whatever we want to Jews, we can do whatever we want to Jews. I think our response to this needs to be not just that it's wrong in its target, but we need to be conducting ourselves such as to show the world this, like, deeply, I think, foundational and radical Jewish message that we should all consider each of ourselves and everybody else to be neither wicked nor good. That whole way of thinking is vicious, because that whole way of thinking absolves all of us of responsibility. Because if we're already wicked, there's no point in trying to be better. And if we're already righteous, we're good. We don't need to be better. We should all think of ourselves and each other as Beinonim. We're all somewhere in the middle. We're all a muddle. That means we're all bundles of good and bad. We can all do better, and we should all be trying to do better and finding ways to take responsibility for ways in which we're not quite realizing our own ideals. And we should be reaching out to others where possible. If there are people who are engaging in vicious behavior, in behavior we really, really do believe and judge is bad and wicked and harmful, it's not always possible to reach such people. It is often not. But there really are cases where you actually can reach people, you actually can engage in conversation, and through that kind of conversation, you can help them see and understand that they do not need to divide the world into so starkly into good and evil. And in that way, I actually, and I really think we can contribute to building a better society. And I actually think this is fundamental to what Judaism is after.
All right, that's an incredible idea. And before we discuss the merits of your idea, I want to push back a little bit on how you're reading the Rambam.
Okay, great.
So I want to know how you understand the fact that you're right. It's a little bit strange that the Rambam says that whoever has sins who outweigh his merits, he immediately dies. But also, and it's difficult in the Rambam also. But at the end, towards the end of the halacha and halacha gimel that you were reading, the Rambam talks about how a person is judged between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and his merits are weighed and he says, "Umishanim sa rasha nechtam lamita." The one who's found to be a rasha is sealed for death, and it seems to be not immediately, but at some point over the next year.
Yeah, this is an old problem of how to balance the halacha aleph and halacha gimel. I'm taking the Raiva's approach. Like, he seems to mean what he says in aleph. So I agree. Like, you have to figure out how there's some judgment that happens specifically on Rosh Hashanah that is then applied. And I'll point out also, like, he really wants to stress the miyad thing, the immediate thing. And also, right, like we know in the case of Stom and Amorah, like, it doesn't happen immediately, right? And also in the case of the Mabul, and specifically in the examples he gives. So like, there's clearly some delay always in the judgment, and so it could be, right, when he says miyad, he means like you're judged immediately, and the sentencing may take a little bit of time, but I think he does mean like it's going to happen soon. And I think either way, like the Ravid's point, and again, all of the Farshim asked this, like, it just does not appear to be the case that on any kind of short, discernible time frame, that wicked people, the people we think of as wicked, die. It's just not. We don't see that. Like, you should see a correlation, and we don't.
Yeah, and I think that the same issue is in halacha gimel. Even if it's a little bit delayed, the assumption is that if you are nechtam lamita, it's over the next year, and we find lots of people who seem to be pretty evil who don't die within the year of whatever it is that we determine that they're evil. But I wonder if the Rambam is suggesting that it's not about sins versus good deeds, but it's sins versus merit, and maybe within merit, we're also thinking about potential, like the potential for them to be redeemed and to redeem themselves and to do tshuva, which once again I think is very consistent with your point of looking at the person's actions as opposed to their personality, or like who they are as a person, as someone who is all guilty or all bad, or somebody who is engaged in a lot of bad actions but still has the potential to come back.
Yeah, I think that's a really deep, really important point, right? Like, part of the epistemic broadening, right? Like, only God knows. The Rambam spells that out in terms of, like, well, if you count up their actions, you don't know how to weight them appropriately. And I think your point is really vital. The point is, like, human beings, we're not just aggregates of our past actions. Like, that's a weird way of thinking about human beings. We're like beings in the moment, of the present, who are a function of our past story and the things we've done. But we also, like, already in the present, we have these horizons toward the future, and we're living towards the future. And yeah, I would think it's obvious that that's a part of the calculus. Part of what's being said here is that we all have this, in principle, for all we know, any one of us has this potential to do better in the future. I think this is not in the Rambam, but the one classical line on the Stom and Amora case specifically. So, like, why there have been lots of bad nations, lots of bad city states, lots of bad groups that do bad things. Like, why? What was specific about that? Is this a line of argument from the? I think Chazal is spelling this out in the Agadot and Sanhedrin, but the Baal HaKeda is very explicit about this. That what seals their fate is that they make any moral improvement or any kind of moral accountability, it's self-punishable. They corrupt the courts. Anyone who tries to do it is what happens in the case of Lot, right? Anyone who tries to in any way break from the vicious consensus is punished. And with that, at that point, once they've made sin, wickedness into law and punished any possibility of remediation, then they've created a systematically closed loop where there's no possibility for doing better. And it's only at that point that their fate is sealed. But so long as they could do better, they can. And I just, there are, especially, and it's true in general in the world, people really do change, people really do grow and develop. And actually, like, it's very slow and frustrating, but communities grow and change and develop, and even nations grow and change and develop, even the world. Progress is so hard and so frustrating, and so there's always, one step forward, two steps back. But I do think there really is moral progress, but especially for young people, kids in their 20, 21, 22. Not some of them will remain in that emotional, spiritual state of late adolescence throughout their entire lives. That is a real thing, but most will not. And many of them will, in any case, sell out to the strictures of corporate culture and will give up on any kind of political expression anyway. But many will also, and like some of them may completely change their moral and political bearings. The more fruitful avenue, and the more plausible avenue in most cases, is just precisely this: that whereas so many of these young people are thinking in these like rigorously dichotomous all or nothing terms, they can over time come to see the gray in between the black and white. And I actually think the better way to put it is they'll come to see just the humanity in good and evil. I actually think that's like the best way of spelling out what a Benoni is. I think this is what the Rambam says. This is my editorializing, but I think a tzaddik is a kind of angel. Someone who transcends the realm of vice and wickedness. They're above all of it. And that's how people want to feel. They want to feel like I'm one of the good people, and I would never fall prey to the kinds of viciousness that those people are doing. And Rasha is a kind of demon. It's a monster, cancer. And again, therefore, those people are irredeemable. There's no point in any kind of conversation or partnership with them. They just need to be destroyed. And I think the Rambam's basic proposition is that every human being is no more or less than a human being. We're all just mediocre. We're somewhere in between, and we make all kinds of mistakes and we do all kinds of bad things, not generally out of demonic evil. And we all would want to do better if we could, and if we got the right help and we found ourselves in the right place and did the right kinds of work, we could actually do better. And therefore we should try. Famously, Hannah Arendt, we have talked about this before, right?
Yeah, and I was about to push you in this direction anyway.
Right. So she got herself in a lot of trouble. People are still very angry at her for her account of Adolf Eichmann's trial. Her claim that Adolf Eichmann was not demonically evil, maybe even not demonically anti-Semitic. He was just, banal was her term, he was just a mid-level, just kind of pathetic bureaucrat who was just wanted to be a part of the system, just wanted to get ahead, kind of found himself engineering the final solution, and that's all there was to it. There was nothing deeper to his evil than that. And she talks about this in very graphic terms. She thinks evil in general is a surface phenomenon. There's no depth to it. People got very, very upset with her about this. But whether she was right or wrong about Eichmann in particular, there's a lot of historical debate about this. I think she's making a really important point. And it's important to see, people don't get past the headline in the Eichmann book. What she said, the point of the Eichmann book, the argument in the book and where it goes in the conclusion is that Eichmann committed crimes against humanity and should be put to death for violating Eichmann, Arendt says, has refused to be a part of the human community, and so we should refuse him as a part of the human community, and so we should put him to death. That is the point of Arendt's book. It's an indictment and a condemnation. He should be killed, which is that's pretty serious. She was not letting him off the hook. What she was saying was it's a mistake to think of him as a monster, and actually thinking of him as a monster lets him off the hook. And if he's a monster, then it's not a matter of his own volition. It wasn't a matter of his own choice. He just was a sociopath. And she says, maybe some of the guards at Auschwitz, the camps, maybe some of these people were really just sociopaths. I forget who she says, maybe it was Himmler. Maybe Himmler was actually just a sociopath. She's I don't know. She never addresses Hitler in that case. She doesn't say anything. To my knowledge, she never mentions Hitler in that context. But she says, look, and this is what the Rambam says again, right? There could be genuinely fully evil people. There's nothing ruling that out. But as an epistemic matter and as a moral matter, we shouldn't even relate to our enemies. Even the people we want to put to death, we should put to death because because of the evil and monstrous things they've done. It's morally unproductive for us to think of them as monsters or demonic, because for her it was important that can let us off the hook, and we'll fail to learn the lessons of the ways in which we could just as easily fall into those kinds of patterns if we're not careful. But also, in a really important way, it lets them off the hook. It absolves them of responsibility. We should be precisely, the point of all of this is not to say that we're not saying that there are no evil people and therefore we're all fine. It's the opposite. There are no evil people because there are only human people. There are only mediocre people. And that means that every single one of us has the responsibility to weigh our next actions. Is the next thing we do going to tip the scales for our own lives, for our communal life, and for the world, for humanity's existence, towards the moral good or the moral evil?
It's so hard sometimes to not to demonize people, and I think part of that comes from that it's often very difficult not to conflate niceness with goodness.
Yeah, but say a little more. What you mean?
I mean that if someone's nice, it's hard to imagine them doing things that are evil. And if you're just kind of some good-natured mid-level bureaucrat who goes home to his wife and kids and has a lovely dinner and tucks them into bed, maybe even helps washes the dishes later, but in his day job, he's organizing the final solution.
Yeah, it's incredible, actually, but vital. And so I'm going to pivot in a way that's going to elicit a kind of association that I'm going to say is not what I mean. I do not mean to compare any particular university bureaucrat to Adolf Eichmann, but I will say, there's a lot of, less so at Yale where I am, but also true at Yale, and like more famously and nationally in Columbia, Harvard, but various other places. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with university administrations and how they've handled things the last couple of years, and there's a lot of desire for them to do better. Some of this comes out in very punitive ways. A lot of people have lost their jobs. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. These jobs are not entitlements, and if you're not up to the job, and if you say stupid things in front of Congress, you should lose your job. That's just what it is. I'm not crying for anybody, but I will say, as somebody who is on the ground and who actually wants to make things better, and who knows that many of these people, high, mid-level, top administrators, even the ones who are so frustrating because we see that there's things that they could do that they just won't do. And one way of reading that is that they are themselves vicious anti-Semites who are out for the Jews and are themselves evil and wicked. And so we should use every means at our disposal to vilify them and attack them. And again, there will be times when it's totally appropriate to hold them accountable. And sometimes it's the best tool we have is to put some things in the news and get them some bad press. I'm not ruling those out. But also, there just often are avenues for more constructive engagement. Whereas if you go to these people and say, look, we're all on the same team here. I know, this is a problem. We know this is a problem. And you don't, put it in these terms. But the issue is not that you, academic administrator, are vicious or wicked. It's that you're small, and bureaucracy makes you small, and you don't think you have as much agency or power as you might. You don't think you can get away with making changes. You don't know whose feathers you're going to ruffle. And honestly, you actually innocently may not have thought of the relevant solution because it's just not part of your world. You've always done things a certain way and never thought about them. You've just never had to confront this particular problem before. And so you haven't. And so I'm here and I want to work with you. And there's a tacit threat of I can go to the press and make trouble for you. But I would genuinely rather not do that. I would actually try to build a partnership and a real friendship out of common purpose and see where we can make progress. Because there have been real failures on your end, but those failures are a function of your being human. They're not a function of your being demonic. And so there's real work we can do together. And I've seen the fruits of that in really, really effective ways. And and then that leaves the door open for further progress going forward.
Rabbi Alex, this has been really incredible and really important. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and definitely to hear these wonderful ideas.
Thanks so much, Don.
And this is our last episode for a while, right? We're going on hiatus.
Yeah, we're gonna take some time off for the summer, and do some thinking, some learning, do some guitar playing. We'll see. Yeah, thanks, man.
All right.
Thanks to all of you.
Well, I'll see you at the beginning of next season.
Awesome.
Hi, good morning. My name is Margaret Arnstis. I'm the admin assistant in the chaplain's office at Cedarfield.